What's up, y'all? It's your boy R to the A to the S. Yes, Roz here with Proceed with Caution Blog. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Anthony Bradley of King College professor. Dr. Bradley, how you doing?
Doing well. Happy to be here.
All right. First question I want to ask you is about an article that was written about 2008 by Xavier Pickett on the miseducation of evangelical Negro. In this article, he argued that some black evangelicals, particularly Reformed, have sort of an affinity for whiteness. The conferences, the theologians, the pastors, the churches seem to be all white. I want to get your thoughts. Is that just a matter of preference, or is that maybe something that somebody should look at as far as blacks and not having a full perspective, I guess, on theology in that sense?
Right. It's probably a combination of two things. I think in part it's probably circumstantial. What happens is that when brothers leave the traditional black church setting, they only get exposed to a lot of these white authors in seminaries and Christian colleges and at conferences. So they just get out of the circuit. So I think there's something a bit benign in that sense. So one could argue that it's partly circumstantial, but I also think there's something worse that may be at play as well. And I would say, secondly, what happens is that when a lot of blacks leave the black church, leave the black community, they believe this myth that the black church they had left is just categorically unsound.
Okay.
And so they are encouraged then to sort of blanketly reject black pastors and black theologians and all the resources that come out of the black church, because it's thought to be, well, we left that church, we left that community because they don't get the gospel right, or they don't understand theology properly. And what happens is, inadvertently, is they throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Okay.
That all of the good resources and traditions that come from the black church community that can help us understand our current situation in the future gets left behind. And there's this sort of tacit understanding that the evangelical space is a more pure form of Christianity than we find in the traditional black space. Now, it's interesting that's sort of the caricature, but it became pretty obvious if you witness what happened in the response to the shooting in Charleston, that the first response from those brothers and sisters in the AME church was forgiveness. Why? Because they believe the gospel. Right? So they were able to forgive Dylan Roof because of what he did, first and foremost because they recognized that God had forgiven them because of the gospel. Now, there are all sorts of things in the AME church that many people might have some issues with, but you can't say that church, that those people are unsound theologically. You can see it by the way they responded to Mr. Roof. And so what happens is that there is this unfortunate inadvertent positioning where blacks are only presented with white scholarship, and they're also encouraged to look down on the black church with disdain. That leads to this miseducation of the Negro, where you no longer appreciate your mother's and your grandmother's tradition that got you here in the first place.
And last question I want to ask you about is a little switching gears, is about financial aid. What are your thoughts on the whole financial aid system? For some people, it's necessary in order to pay for school.
Right.
You got to get financial aid, but at the same time, it leads to some financial bondage and things of that sort. So what do you think about the system? Or do you think it needs to be some type of reform to it? What are your thoughts?
Right. Well, as a college professor, I can tell you that financial aid is usually the reason that people make decisions about the schools that they end up going to. Unless you're wealthy and you can choose whatever, it's mostly going to be about who gives you the best financial aid package. So this is a huge issue. And unfortunately, because of the current rise in the level of loans that are given out, you have more and more people getting into more and more debt. Now, what's also happened is that the loan program has also inflated costs, because now universities don't have to be fiscally responsible because they're going to get the loan money anyway, whether you graduate or not.
All right.
Right? So if you enroll and take out loans, they get the money for that year, and if you don't finish, the school doesn't care because they still get the money.
Right.
So this is what it means, is that we have to really exercise a lot of wisdom and diligence in thinking about whether or not, A, college is even worth it, because you don't need to have a college degree to have a flourishing life in this country. It's not necessary. Only about 25, it depends on the statistics that you source, but only about a third of adult Americans even have a college degree. So most people in the country don't have college degrees. So you first have to ask the question, is it worth it? But then secondly, you've got to ask the question, if you're taking out loans, is the debt worth it? And if school A means I get in more loan debt than school B, then should I go to school A or school B? Essentially, the bottom line is this: unless it's an Ivy League school, it really doesn't matter where you go. So asking the question, is the debt worth it in terms of going to Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth? Well, it could be, given all of the ancillary things that usually happen as one becomes a part of the Ivy League network. Outside of that, I'm not convinced, for example, that the debt is worth it going to a local state college versus a school like Duke. The difference in the long run might not be that great given the amount of debt that you're in.
Right.
You got to be smart about it. The interest rates are pretty favorable, usually 4 to 6%, but you'll be paying that loan off 3 or 4 or 5 times by the time you pay it off completely. And that's something that as a student, as a family, you've got to think about it. If you graduate from college with $40,000 or $60,000 worth of debt, then you have to be aggressive about paying it off as soon as possible. Otherwise, you will be paying that loan off several times over because of the interest that's on the loan. And again, depending on the school, it might not be worth it. So I encourage students to really think about a whole set of variables, including long-term income potential, whether or not that environment is going to be good for me and my flourishing. Is it going to put my family in a position where they be negatively affected financially because of it? To think about a lot of those things before making a decision. One last thing, I'm telling parents now, look, if your student, if your child gets in $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 worth of debt, I'm encouraging them to move back home with you when they graduate. Okay? So they can get a job, and hopefully you won't charge them too much rent. If you love them, maybe don't rent at all. So they can pay that loan off. The faster you pay the loan off, the better. So you can move back home after you graduate, get a full-time job, send most of all your income to getting rid of that loan. By the time you're 24, 25, 26, you're out of debt, and then you're free. Otherwise, loans make decisions for you in terms of where you live, what kind of job you take, etc. So you end up working for the loan instead of working and doing the kinds of things that you went to school to do in the first place.
Okay. So can you give people your contact information or anything else they'd like to reach you?
Absolutely. I'm at the King's College in New York City. Come by and see us. We are right in the heart of the financial district, right nearby the New York Stock Exchange, a few blocks from Ground Zero. We are www.tkc.edu. My email address is abradley@tkc.edu, and I'd love to hear from any of you.
All right. This is Proceed with Caution Blog. Kobe Sutton. I'm out. Triple.